Good morning. I'm Asan Giordano, and this is your DMV Daily Dose for Tuesday, March 10th, 2020.
It's currently clear and 54 degrees in Baltimore. Expect cloudy skies starting in the morning, and rain tonight with mixed conditions for the rest of the day. Today's high will be 68 degrees, and the low will be 53.
Well, the Baltimore Brewers' Fern Shin reports on Lance Lucas, who was 17 years old when just months away from graduating Woodlawn High School, he was caught red-handed in a lucrative scheme he had devised to make duplicate tickets to movies, parties, and special events. As he liked to tell the story, he was expelled from school and narrowly escaped juvenile detention after an Army recruiter cried about his fate in front of a judge. Well, Lucas wasn't so lucky yesterday. He pleaded guilty in U.S. District Court in Baltimore, says Fern, to paying $42,500 in bribes to convicted Maryland delegate Cheryl Glenn. Sitting in his Porsche with Glenn last year, Lucas reassured the, quote, nervous 45th District delegate about the crime they were committing by reminding her of the milieu he came up with. Quote, I'm from Baltimore for real. Like, for real Baltimore, he says. This is the least illegal thing that I've ever done. This is like patty cake compared to this shit in Baltimore City. Well, the conversation, apparently caught on tape, was a part of the narrative released by federal prosecutors as Lucas acknowledged making 11 payments to Glenn to help an unidentified company obtain a medical marijuana license and to promote a Cyber Warriors diversity program. In January, Glenn pleaded guilty to bribery for accepting $33,750 in return for voting to increase the number of medical marijuana licenses, among other favors. The bribery detailed in Lucas's plea agreement yesterday involved payments made to Glenn in 2018 and 2019 and also involves a person seeking a medical marijuana license. At one point, according to prosecutors, Glenn arranged for Lucas and representatives from that company to meet with the chairman of the state's Cannabis Commission. At another point, the plea agreement says he promised Glenn that he would be, quote, 007 about this shit. Well, now the 44-year-old Lucas, who had gained prominence in Baltimore as a tech entrepreneur, serving at one point as the president of the Greater Baltimore Black Chamber of Commerce, will look to now serve federal prison time over his role in this get-rich-quick off the backs of the people scheme. He will be sentenced on June 10th. The Baltimore Sun is reporting a bill that would allow labor unions to set the terms for how employees are hired on city construction projects has run into early opposition from Baltimore's minority and non-union contractors. Speaking in front of City Hall Monday, representatives of several construction firms said the proposed legislation would be a burden on the city's non-union shops, many of which are minority-owned and employ people rejected by union groups like those with criminal records. The proposed bill, which is still in its infancy, will require project labor agreements, otherwise known as PLAs, a pre-hire collective bargaining agreement between a contractor and a labor organization that establishes a labor group to represent everyone who works on the project. Championed by City Council President Brandon Scott and Councilwoman Shannon Sneed, the bill would apply to all city construction projects valued at $25 million or more, or long-term capital improvement plans of more than $15 million that involve projects at multiple locations. Scott and Sneed, both Democrats and both running citywide, Scott for mayor, Sneed for city council president, have argued that the bill would increase local hiring and ensure competitive wages and benefits. A labor group would serve as collective bargaining representative for everyone working on the project. The agreements would contain guarantees against strikes and other work disruptions, along with procedures for resolving labor disputes. However, the contractors and allies who protested at City Hall yesterday argued the legislation as proposed would actually discourage local hiring. Natalia Lewis, a chief operations officer and co-owner of M. Lewis Construction, said that the unions who will dictate the terms of the agreement are based in Philadelphia or Richmond, Virginia. An infusion of outside labor will be inevitable, she says, pushing local workers out of jobs. Robert DeShields, very well-known, high-profile attorney here in Baltimore, spoke at the Monday's rally as well and chided Scott and Sneed for introducing this legislation without studying whether such agreements were even needed. nor did they either one of them come to ask the input of Maryland minority contractors. Other states prohibit them, he says. In fact, 25 other states prohibit these PLAs, according to our research, and it appears that their introduction of the legislation served its purpose, as both Scott and Snead received the lion's share of the city's union support and endorsements. Go figure. Well, the Baltimore Sun is also reporting, determined to get non-custodial fathers to do more to support their children, Colorado took a bold step. It stopped making these parents repay the government for welfare payments their families received. And nearly 3 years into the social experiment, the state's poorest families have seen a cascade of benefits, Colorado officials say. Child support payments paid by low-income fathers increased considerably, with all of the money going to the children and not the state agency. Relationships between co-parenting exes get better. Kids were given the advantage of more financial and emotional support from both their mom and their dads. Maryland could take this step and a handful of others to immediately transform its rigid and punitive child support system. In doing so, the state would join efforts across the country to address counterproductive policies and practices. An investigation by the Baltimore Sun found that Maryland's child support system is actually hurting some of the state's neediest families and their communities, especially struggling Baltimore City neighborhoods where millions of dollars of child support debt is concentrated. The Sun's analysis found that parents owe a collective $233 million in just 10 city zip codes, money that is largely considered uncollectible. The debt tears families apart and can drive men into the underground, sometimes illicitly. Often it can be traced to unrealistic orders that are based on imputed income, what a parent who is unemployed could earn if he or she had a full-time job. The arrears trigger enforcement actions that can make it harder for parents to get and keep a job, such as suspending the person's driver's license or the professional license required for nursing assistants, barbers, plumbers, and other occupations. The problem gets worse if a parent is incarcerated and child support bills continue to run up while he is behind bars. The government collects child support from non-custodial mothers as well, but most cases involve fathers. In Baltimore, nearly all of them are African American and many are poor. The burden of their debt is seen as a significant problem afflicting poor Baltimore neighborhoods. To get better outcomes, advocates say lawmakers could stop routinely basing child support orders on fictitious imputed income. Maryland can look to other states to do a better job making sure parents who need their driver's licenses for work don't lose them over unpaid child support. State could decide to stop sending child support bills to men in prison. Continuing to bill incarcerated parents creates debt that mounts when they are behind bars and have virtually no ability to make those payments. The debt that accumulates often does not result in money for kids, but doesn't act as a deterrent for ex-offenders seeking legitimate employment. Another thing that's not being mentioned is that if a custodial mother goes to court and files for child support, by the time that they go to court, which could be 4 to 6 months or more later, once a child support order is put into place, let's say hypothetically $500 a month, that judge then backdates it from the day that that parent filed it. So that's $500 a month times 6 months or more, which is $3,000 that that parent already owes beyond the now $500 a month moving forward. Many people do not have that type of income, disposable income, to begin paying. That means parents, non-custodial parents on these child support orders are already put into a hole immediately after being imposed. Well, Maryland Matters is reporting that in February, Montgomery County became the first county in the U.S. to ban discrimination based on hairstyle. Now, Maryland appears poised to join Virginia and a handful of other states that have taken similar action. A measure patterned after a bill that passed the California legislature unanimously has already been approved by the Maryland Senate. On Friday, a House committee heard testimony on a companion bill that has attracted support from 49 state delegates. The California measure was known as the Crown Act, an acronym for Create a Respectful and Open Workplace for Natural Hair. Maryland advocates have adopted that same name in referring to their bill. A Friday news conference morphed into a natural hair rally and a therapy session for lawmakers and staff, mostly women, but a few men as well. They traded stories and commemorates about over instances in which they had been forced to alter their natural hair texture or style to conform to a boss's whim of what constitutes a, quote, professional look. The bill would expand the definition of race to include naturally occurring texture and style. It also defines protective hairstyles to include braids, twists, and locks. A number of highly publicized incidents have elevated the issue, including incidents in which young people were forced to change their hair before being allowed to accept a diploma or participate in a wrestling match. On Wednesday, Virginia became the fourth state after California, New York, and New Jersey to ban the discrimination based on hair texture or style. No one signed up to testify in opposition of Smith's bill in the House Health and Government Operations Committee on Friday, and the Senate measure, sponsored by Senator William Smith Jr., and the House bill was sponsored by Delegate Stephanie Smith, the Democrat from the 45th District, was co-sponsored by nearly half the chamber, Senator Smith's bill, including a handful of Republicans. It passed 46-0 on February 28th in the state Senate. I'm your man, Mr. Politics, and this has been your DMV Daily Dose for Tuesday, March the 10th, 2020. For more information on the articles that I mentioned, just go on over to that website at www.dmvdaily.news.